You never expect the person who once clutched your hand in the dark, whispered dreams against your shoulder, and promised forever to become your biggest antagonist. But that's exactly what Camille did. 2 years ago, she looked me dead in the eyes across a dimly lit kitchen table, the scent of burnt toast lingering in the air, and said, "You're just too basic, Marcus." As if everything I had given, every sacrifice I'd made, had become a checkbox she'd grown bored of ticking. I didn't scream, didn't beg. There was a moment, a long, cruel moment, where I considered asking her to stay, to work on it. But then I looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman who had already packed her heart and gone. The divorce papers came 2 weeks later. She didn't even hire a lawyer. Said she didn't need much, just the house, the car, and the accounts. I laughed to myself as I packed my life into 2 suitcases and 1 worn passport. She could have it all. She already had Sterling Langford on standby. Sterling Langford. A walking headline with teeth that gleamed like goddamn sponsorship deals. He was the kind of man who didn't just walk into rooms, he made them shrink or stretch to fit his mood. A real estate developer with inherited money, a yacht called Second Empire, and more followers on Instagram than I cared to count. I saw their wedding photos online a month after our divorce was finalized. She wore something sleek and white and empty-eyed. He stood beside her like he had just won a silent auction. They didn't even try to be subtle. A few of my old friends forwarded me clips from their engagement party. To ambition, she toasted. To never settling for average. It wasn't even coded. It was aimed. I remember sitting in a cafe that day, somewhere near the marina in Dubai, stirring a lukewarm espresso and thinking, good. Let her talk. Because I had work to do. I disappeared, not out of shame, but out of necessity. Into silence. Into grind. I took the prototype, my last ace, the tech I had been quietly refining in our garage while she rolled her eyes, and flew to Dubai with nothing but ambition and caffeine. I slept in a shared flat with 2 other expats, ate shawarma 4 nights a week, and pitched my product to anyone with a tie and a business card. It was hell, but it was focused hell. I made connections, some solid, some shady, and learned to speak the language of capital, speed, certainty, and usefulness. I stopped checking her social media, stopped wondering if she missed me. Instead, I taught myself how to build momentum from nothing. And then came the call from a mid-size investment firm in Riyadh. They'd heard about my work from a client in Dubai. They wanted a meeting. That meeting turned into a $5 million seed round. I didn't celebrate. I just stared at the contract, pen hovering in my hand, and thought of every night she had walked past me as I coded, every time she muttered, "Why don't you just get a real job?" I signed, not out of revenge, but relief. Because now I didn't need her validation. I had velocity. I had investors. I had a future. That's when I met Aisha. She was attending the same innovation summit in Qatar, sitting 2 rows ahead of me, asking sharper questions than half the panelists. She wore her intelligence like armor and her kindness like perfume, subtle but disarming. We ended up sharing a cab back to the hotel, talking about equity and ethics and the psychology of growth. She asked what I built. I told her. She said, "Show me." I did. 3 months later, she was helping lead my marketing strategy. 5 months in, we were married. Not everyone understood how fast it happened. But when you know, you know. And when you've been dragged through the mud of someone else's expectations and finally meet someone who sees you, not what you could be, but what you are, it's like stepping out of a tunnel and realizing you'd been holding your breath. Camille's voice faded into background noise. I no longer needed to prove her wrong. I had built something right. Funny how the same people who whispered about my fall now wanted meetings, handshakes, introductions. Funny how silence becomes strategy when you treat pain like kindling instead of an anchor. So no, I didn't crash. I recalibrated. And now? Now they say my name in boardrooms. Now reporters ask for quotes. Now my inbox is full of partnerships, pitch decks, and praise. But I never forget that night in the kitchen. The burnt toast. Her cold eyes. The final sentence. "You're too basic, Marcus." Maybe I was. But basic doesn't crash. Basic builds. The invitation came wrapped in cream cardstock and condescension. Langford Foundation Annual Gala, it read, with a flourish of gold foil and a smug little RSVP link. I almost deleted it. I stared at it for a long minute on my phone, thumb hovering. Camille and Sterling, posting in their signature excess. Normally, that would have been reason enough to avoid it. But this time it was different. I hadn't spoken to Camille in nearly 2 years. Not a word. And yet somehow, Our paths kept crossing in indirect ways. An investor who mentioned knowing the Langfords, a magazine that ran a piece on tech disruptors and referenced me as the former husband of Camille Langford Monroe. That name. I didn't even recognize it as mine anymore. Just something I outgrew. Like a suit 2 sizes too tight. So why did I consider going? Maybe because fate has a twisted sense of humor. The Langford Foundation had recently acquired equity in a global AI startup. The same one where I now sit as an advisory board member. Irony or poetry, I hadn't decided. But the reality was simple. I had every right to attend. More than that, I was expected. Still, I hesitated. Revenge wasn't my flavor. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want drama. But I did want clarity. And something inside me, call it instinct, call it healing, said, go. Not to prove something to them, but to remind myself of what I'd become. We had just wrapped a government contract in Saudi, a huge milestone that deserved celebration. My wife, Aisha, and I were already scheduled to fly into California for a tech roundtable the following week. The timing lined up like dominoes. And when I showed her the invitation, Aisha didn't flinch. You want to go? She asked, her voice unreadable. I looked at her across the breakfast table, her fingers curled around a white espresso cup, her dark eyes steady. I think I need to, I said. She nodded. Then let's go. 2 days later, we landed in California. It was our first time back in a while, too many memories, too many ghosts. But we weren't there for nostalgia. We were there for presence. For precision. The Langford Gala was held at their foundation's new event space, a converted art museum in downtown LA, reeking of curated elegance and faux humility. You know the type. Exposed beams, glass chandeliers, minimalist flower arrangements that cost more than a semester of college. I arrived first. Aisha had another meeting to attend with one of her investors and would join me later. She insisted I go ahead. I pulled up in a matte black town car, understated, not flashy. I wore a deep navy suit, no tie, collar open. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just showing up. Inside, the place was buzzing with all the usual suspects, billionaires trying to look like visionaries, influencers pretending they knew what AI stood for, and the kind of people who laughed a little too loud near anyone with press credentials. I moved through the crowd, nodding, exchanging small talk. No one recognized me at first. 2 years in tech is a lifetime. But the murmurs started once someone from the board spotted me and did a double take. Marcus. I smiled. In the flesh. People stared. They always do when someone walks and they bury too soon. I kept it professional. Didn't gloat. Just sipped champagne and listened more than I spoke. But I could feel the temperature shift. Eyes watching. Conversations trailing off when I walked past. That strange mix of curiosity and unease people get when the underdog doesn't stay under. And then I heard it. Laughter. Sharp. Familiar. Weaponized. I turned without meaning to. Instinct. And there she was, Camille. Dressed in something sheer and expensive, her hair styled like it took a team and a timeline. Sterling stood next to her, all tailored smugness and expensive watch energy. They were at the center of a circle, Camille's arm looped loosely through his, glass raised, voice clear. He told everyone he got remarried, she said, with a smirk that had razors under it. But I haven't seen a single photo. Maybe his wife's imaginary. Laughter erupted. Ugly, theatrical. She wasn't done. Come on, she added. No one real marries a poor leftover. My name wasn't said. But it didn't need to be. The group laughed again. That kind of laughter that's not really funny. It's validation disguised as humor. I didn't flinch. Didn't let my expression shift even an inch. I turned away from the circle, lifted my champagne glass, and smiled at a nearby art piece, some abstract mess framed like meaning. I let their voices fall away. I wasn't going to give them the performance they expected. The broken ex-husband, tail between his legs. No, that man didn't exist anymore. They just hadn't met the new one yet. And soon, they would. It started with the sound of her laugh, sharper than I remembered, polished with cruelty, dressed up like charm. I was mid-conversation with a venture capitalist from Berlin when it sliced through the air like a wire. I paused, mid-nod, something in my chest tightening. I didn't turn right away. I didn't have to. I knew that laugh. Knew the way she threw her head back just slightly, how she touched her throat like she was trying to keep the joy from spilling out too much. Camille. Always aware of her audience. Always performing. The VC kept talking, something about ethical algorithms, but my attention had already drifted. My eyes found her through the artful cluster of floral arrangements and crystal chandeliers. Camille stood near the far wall, beneath a massive abstract painting that probably cost more than my first apartment. She was holding court like she always used to at fundraisers, back when we were married and she wore my last name and stole sips of my wine during donor speeches. Her hand was wrapped around Sterling's forearm like she owned it. And maybe she did. He looked amused, nodding along to whatever she was saying. That classic rich boy smirk curled into his lips. Around them, a group of people, sponsors, influencers, socialites, leaned in, soaking up her story like gospel. And then she said it. He told everyone he got remarried, Camille said, her voice loud enough to travel. But I haven't seen a single photo. Maybe his wife's imaginary. The words hung in the air. They didn't just sting. They detonated. A few heads turned, first at her, then at me. I didn't react. I held my champagne glass steady, brought it to my lips, and sipped like I was hearing a weather report, not a public jab aimed straight at my life. The laughter that followed was cruel and performative. One woman even clutched her stomach, like Camille had delivered the punchline of the year. Sterling chuckled too, but it sounded unsure, like he wasn't entirely comfortable being the prop in someone else's vendetta. Camille, of course, was glowing. She always got drunk on attention. This wasn't about me to her. It was about the performance. About being the kind of woman who could laugh off the past like it was bad fashion. The kind of woman who wins. Then she raised her glass. "Come on," she said, turning slightly so the whole circle could see her. "No one real marries a poor leftover." The crowd responded just like she wanted. Gasps masked as laughter, that high society brand of cruelty disguised as cleverness. My name still wasn't mentioned, but the impact was unmistakable. I felt it hit like cold water down my back. I let myself breathe. Just once. A slow, steady inhale. And I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. And in a way, that made it easier. Camille hadn't changed. Not even a little. She still believed that power came from belittling, from twisting the knife, while making it look like ballet. And they still followed her cues like loyal dancers. I turned back toward the VC, who now looked at me with a mix of pity and uncertainty. "Excuse me," I said quietly, setting my glass down on a passing tray. "I need to say hello to a few people." I didn't walk toward her. I walked the opposite direction. Past the bar. Past a hedge of decorative orchids. Toward the hallway leading to the lounge area where I could regroup without the stairs. But even there, I could hear their murmurs. "Did you hear what she said? Is he really remarried?" I thought he vanished. That was the version of me they remembered. The man who was left behind. The one who had the nerve to dream without a pedigree. Who married up and didn't play the part well enough to keep her. What they didn't know was that I didn't vanish. I had evolved. Camille's laughter still echoed faintly from the main hall, but it didn't touch me the way it used to. Because this time, I wasn't alone. Aisha would be arriving soon. And when she walked through that door, the room would remember how fast narratives can flip. But more than that, something deeper clicked into place. I didn't come here for Camille, or for revenge. I came because I was ready. Ready to walk through the same halls they thought I'd crawl through. Ready to be seen, not as a man who'd been discarded, but one who had become something in the silence. Someone who didn't flinch anymore. So I straightened my jacket, smoothed the front, walked back into the ballroom with a calm smile stitched across my face. They didn't know it yet, but the night was about to turn. I didn't react, not the way they expected me to. No clenched fists, no awkward retreat, no trembling jaw begging for dignity. Just a silent toast, my glass raised in calm defiance as Camille's laughter faded into the folds of another ego-driven conversation. She'd gotten her moment. The crowd had laughed. The performance was complete. And yet, I knew something she didn't. The moment wasn't over. I took another sip, let the champagne fizz down my throat like quiet ammunition, and pivoted back into the room. Conversations resumed around me, small circles of influence and money swirling like currents. I passed them all, unbothered, unseen by those who didn't know me, recognized by those who did. And those who did were whispering now. Was that him? Marcus? Didn't he vanish? Didn't he lose everything? I let their words skim off me like rain against stone. None of them knew the truth. Not yet, but they were about to. Because just as I was about to slip back into the comfort of a low profile and a second drink, someone tapped my shoulder. It was the event coordinator, a young man in a pressed black suit and an earpiece that probably made him feel important. "Mr. Rowe," he said, slightly breathless, "you're one of tonight's platinum sponsors." The Langfords would be honored if you said a few words. Just brief. Nothing too formal. Of course. I'd almost forgotten. I wasn't just a guest. I was a name on the sponsor list. One of the reasons the stage existed in the first place. Camille might have been the belle of this superficial ball, but my signature had funded part of the ceiling she was gossiping beneath. I smiled, small and practiced. Of course. The stage wasn't extravagant, just a platform near the center of the room with a curved microphone stand and 2 tasteful spotlights. But the moment I stepped onto it, everything shifted. Subtle, but real. The conversations faded. Heads turned. Forks paused mid-bite. Camille's eyes found me first, confusion tracing the corners of her perfect features. Sterling followed with that tight-lipped expression rich men wear when things veer off script. I stood behind the mic. No notes. No podium. Just breath and clarity. "Good evening," I said, my voice smooth, steady. "I'll keep this brief." A few nods. Some polite smiles. "I was asked to say a few words," I continued, "as one of tonight's sponsors. And I suppose I could talk about innovation or philanthropy or growth metrics, but we've heard all that before." A few chuckles. I smiled lightly. "So instead, I'll say this. There's nothing more powerful than showing up when no one expects you to." Silence. Tighter now. Eyes leaning in. "I believe in second acts," I said, letting the weight settle. "In quiet rebuilds. In disappearing not to vanish, but to evolve. Some of the most important chapters of our lives are the ones written when no one's watching." My gaze didn't drift to Camille. It didn't need to. "I'm honored to be part of tonight's cause," I finished. "But more than that, I'm grateful for every twist in the story that led me here. Even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones. Because without them, I wouldn't have learned how to stand exactly like this." I stepped back. No dramatic pause. No bow. Just presence. There was a smattering of applause at first, then more. Then louder. Real, unforced clapping that echoed through the glass-paneled room like an exhale none of them realized they were holding. I nodded once in thanks, walked off stage, and reached for another glass of champagne. And that's when I heard it. A sound low and distant at first. Like the distant thump of a heartbeat through steel. People around me turned, confused. The floor vibrated faintly beneath our shoes. The chandeliers trembled just enough to send a ripple through the lights. I looked up. Through the glass ceiling, the source came into focus. A helicopter. Its sleek black body descended toward the private helipad just above the rooftop terrace. The pulsing rhythm of its rotors made the air itself feel nervous. Heads tilted. Phones came out. Security started to move, alert, whispering into radios, edging toward the entrance. I didn't move, because I knew what was coming. The double doors at the far end of the hall burst open, not in chaos, but with calculated impact. A breeze pushed in from the terrace, swirling past us like a signal. And then she appeared. Aisha, my wife. She didn't walk in. She arrived. In an ivory silk gown that clung like moonlight and heels that struck the marble with authority. Her curls were pinned back, her earrings caught the light, and her smile, my God, her smile made the entire room forget how to breathe. She stood at the threshold for a single, perfect beat. Then she spoke. "Sorry I'm late," she said, voice soft but piercing, every vowel dipped in confidence. "Had to park the helicopter." Gasps, murmurs, heads swiveling like puppets with tangled strings. And me? I just raised my glass again. To presence. To timing. To the tremor that shakes foundations without raising a single fist. The sound of the helicopter still echoed faintly in the rafters, even as the door shut behind her. Aisha didn't just enter the room, she disrupted its gravitational pull. People were still turning, still whispering, still blinking like they needed time to process what had just happened. The Langford Foundation's annual gala wasn't supposed to have surprises. It was supposed to be predictable, rehearsed, immaculately controlled. But no one had planned for her. She walked like she'd been born on a runway and raised on strategy, calm, steady steps across the marble floor, her heels striking like punctuation marks. Each one said something. "I'm not intimidated. I'm not here for you. I'm already late, but not behind." She didn't scan the room for approval. She didn't need to. The room scanned her. It was muscle memory at this point, for her and for them. Camille had frozen mid-sip. A half-swallowed laugh caught somewhere between her throat and her ego. Sterling stood beside her, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it hurt to breathe. The crowd that had just been laughing at my expense was now watching Aisha like she was the headliner they didn't know they'd paid for. And maybe she was. She reached me without hesitation, slipping between stunned philanthropists and overpriced centerpieces like she belonged. I stood still, eyes locked on hers as she approached, everything else fading. She kissed my cheek, warm, familiar, and whispered in my ear, "Did I miss the toast?" I smiled, voice low enough for only her. "No, you're right on time." She turned to the people nearest us, extending a hand with the grace of royalty and the sincerity of someone who didn't care about pretense. "Hi, I'm Aisha, Marcus's wife." Just like that. 3 syllables and a smile. And Camille's expression cracked, not dramatically, not with theater, but with tiny fissures around the corners of her eyes and mouth. She looked from Aisha to me and back again, trying to force the pieces into a puzzle she never imagined existed. She didn't speak. Not yet. Aisha pivoted gracefully from one handshake to the next, exchanging light pleasantries with donors and board members who suddenly couldn't remember what they'd been saying 5 minutes ago. The same people who'd chuckled at Camille's cruelty now nodded too fast and complimented Aisha's dress like it was sacred. No one dared ask about the helicopter, but they didn't need to. That entrance had done something words couldn't. It had shifted the entire evening. And it wasn't about wealth. That's where people misunderstood her. Aisha didn't care about showing off. She'd grown up in Dakar, Senegal, the daughter of an economist and a diplomat. Her life had always been a study in movement, countries, cultures, languages. She spoke 5 fluently and could read the temperature of a room in half a glance. Her company, a travel tech firm with an eco-forward twist, had been acquired 6 months ago in a deal that made headlines in 3 continents. She didn't just step into power, she made it fit her. And now she was here, at my side, without apology. As we moved together through the room, I noticed something shift. I stopped flicking to Camille. Heads tilted in new directions. The gravity of the gala had moved, and Camille wasn't at the center of it anymore. It didn't take long before we came within her orbit. Camille and Sterling were still standing where I'd left them, though now their postures had changed. Less confident, less certain. They didn't move toward us, didn't speak first. For once, they weren't sure how to frame the narrative. Camille finally blinked her way into speech. "So you're real," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite land. Aisha's head tilted slightly, her expression unfazed. "I've been called a lot of things," she replied, "but imaginary isn't one of them." Even Sterling let out an awkward half-laugh at that. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Aisha's tone held everything: grace, elegance, and the kind of clarity that didn't require volume to be heard. Camille tried to salvage the moment, shifting her stance like she was on camera. "Well, you certainly made an entrance." Aisha's lips curved. "Wasn't the plan. But sometimes presence does the work for you." And that was it. No insults. No jabs. No need for a scene. Just an unmistakable reminder that whatever story Camille had been telling about me, about my supposed loneliness, my failure, my fictional wife, it was now obsolete. The rest of the evening moved on. But the room didn't. They orbited us now. Not because we demanded it. Because authenticity draws gravity. Camille's laughter had been a weapon. Aisha's silence was a mirror. And everyone who looked into it saw themselves a little differently. I caught Camille watching us once more before the night ended. Her eyes were quieter now. Studying. Calculating. But behind the analysis, there was something else. Regret? Maybe. But it didn't matter. Because that night, they didn't see Marcus, the ex-husband Camille mocked. They saw the man who survived her narrative and rewrote his own. Aisha's hand rested on my forearm, steady and warm, grounding me in a room that had just completely reoriented its orbit. People stared, yes, but not the way they used to. Not with smug curiosity or detached pity. Now, it was all laced with confusion. Now, they whispered because they didn't know what else to do. She turned to the next person in our vicinity, a woman in a glittering emerald dress with 3 hyphenated last names and a foundation that claimed to be redefining female empowerment, while still refusing to fund anything under 10 million. "Hi, I'm Aisha," she said with her usual grace, extending a hand. "Marcus's wife. It's lovely to meet you." The woman blinked, barely managing a smile. You look amazing." It was all falling apart behind her eyes, the narrative she'd clearly built off Camille's gossip and that snide little toast from earlier. I watched it unravel with quiet satisfaction. Aisha offered a warm laugh and a compliment about the woman's jewelry before turning her attention to the next person, then the next, introducing herself as if she hadn't just arrived in a helicopter and turned the entire event on its side. That's what made her so powerful. Not the drama, not the spectacle, but the way she treated everyone as if the moment didn't belong to her, even when it very much did. Her name floated through the room in murmurs, fragments. That's Aisha Diop, isn't it? The one from Voyage? She speaks 5 languages. Did she really just say Marcus's wife? Camille, for once, was silent. Sterling looked like he was trying to decide whether to admire Aisha or escape her orbit. His jaw kept twitching, and I saw him tug once at the sleeve of his blazer like the fabric had turned against him. They both built a story of my disappearance, of my smallness, and now the truth was walking around in silk heels and changing the temperature of the air. Aisha leaned in toward me, her hand still on my arm. "You okay?" she asked, voice low, "just for me." I nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." She smiled, not just at me but through me, as if she saw something inside I hadn't even shown her yet. That was the thing about Aisha. She never tried to complete me. She just met me exactly where I was and made that space feel like enough. She moved like confidence wasn't a mask but her mother tongue. Born in Senegal, raised between Dakar and Geneva, educated at Sciences Po in Paris. She didn't tell people those things to impress them. She told them because it was just the truth, and truth didn't scare her. Her tech company had started on a napkin sketch during a long-haul flight. She saw a gap in the travel space, how little of it served African nations or diasporic travelers, and built a solution with elegance and impact. By the time she sold the company, she had board seats in 3 countries and an award from the UN for innovation in global mobility. And she never once made me feel like I had to be more to keep up. We made rounds together, speaking with investors and donors, with designers and developers, with the people who shape industries and the people who pretend to. At one point, someone asked us if we were co-founders. Aisha just laughed and said, "No, we're just partners, in business, in belief, and in life." That answer floated back to Camille eventually. I saw her turn her head just slightly, as if trying not to react, but the stiffness in her shoulders betrayed her. It's one thing to walk away from someone you think is holding you back. It's another thing to watch them become everything you said they couldn't be, without ever raising their voice. Eventually, Camille approached. She was alone. Sterling had vanished into a conversation with 2 hedge fund managers and hadn't looked back. I saw her coming from the corner of my eye, watched her recalibrate her smile as she got closer. She stopped just a few steps away and looked between Aisha and me. "So," she said, trying to sound amused, "you're real." Aisha tilted her head, every inch composed. "I've been called a lot of things," she said calmly, "but imaginary isn't one of them." It wasn't said with malice, just precision. Camille had nothing to counter it with. No quip, no smile sharp enough to slice through the quiet authority that had settled over Aisha's presence. Sterling reappeared just then, hovering awkwardly at Camille's side. "Didn't expect to see you here, Marcus," he muttered. I met his gaze, not hostile, just steady. "That makes 2 of us." Camille opened her mouth again, maybe to salvage what little footing they had left, but it didn't matter. The moment was done. The illusion had broken, and we didn't need to stay much longer. Aisha turned to me and said, "Should we go?" "Yeah," I replied. "Let's." And as we walked away, I didn't look back, because that room no longer held anything I needed. Camille approached like someone trying to solve a riddle she thought she'd written. Her steps were slower than usual, her gaze flickering. Not with confidence, but calculation. The mask was still there, the one she wore so well. Polished, composed, chin just slightly lifted. But the edges were fraying. I could see it in the way she gripped her clutch, fingers tight enough to leave crescent marks in the leather. We were standing near the sculpture installation now, far enough from the stage, close enough to the crowd to still feel the weight of their stares. Aisha had just finished speaking with one of the event's major donors, charming him so thoroughly he asked for her card before she finished her first sentence. The man's assistant was practically beaming. Aisha turned toward me, her eyes catching mine with that familiar spark, and Camille stepped in between. "So, you're real," Camille said again, as if repeating it would help her make sense of the reality in front of her. Aisha didn't miss a beat. "I've been called a lot of things, but imaginary isn't one of them." Her tone was gracious, but each word landed like glass tapping against porcelain, soft, but impossible to ignore. Camille tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "Sorry, Marcus never. Well, he never posted anything." "Privacy is underrated," Aisha replied, tilting her head slightly. "And Marcus doesn't need to prove anything to anyone." That stung. I saw it in Camille's eyes, the way they blinked just a little too fast. Sterling appeared at her side like a man summoned by tension. He didn't say hello, just hovered there with the same slightly bewildered look he'd been wearing all night, as if unsure whether this was still their event or someone else's show now. He finally spoke. "Surprised to see you two here." I smiled. "We're on the advisory board for Langford's AI acquisition, remember?" Seemed like the responsible thing to do. Aisha slipped her arm through mine, casual and natural. "And we happened to be in California. Just wrapped a round table in Palo Alto." Sterling nodded slowly, trying to appear unfazed. But I could see the twitch in his jaw, the way his shoulders subtly shifted like he wanted to adjust the frame, but didn't know how. Camille cleared her throat. "I didn't expect this." Of course she didn't. Camille thought she knew the whole script. She thought she'd closed the book on me, filed it away under basic, and moved on. But life doesn't work like a story you get to author alone. Sometimes the pages rewrite themselves while you're still rehearsing the old lines. And this wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. They had called me a leftover, an afterthought, a man no woman would want unless she needed a placeholder. And now they stood there, frozen, watching, as the woman beside me not only wanted me, but moved with the kind of quiet, magnetic power that couldn't be mimicked. Aisha didn't have to compete with Camille. They weren't in the same category. Camille fought to be seen. Aisha was never invisible. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. There was something beautiful about letting your life speak louder than your voice ever could. The conversation didn't last long. Camille eventually made some excuse about checking on the auction table. Sterling followed, glancing back once like a man leaving a building that no longer had doors for him. As they walked away, I watched a few others glance between them and us, confused, curious, some even amused. The energy had shifted again. Not dramatically, but undeniably. We hadn't said much, but the recalibration had already begun, not just in Camille's mind, but in the eyes of every person who had written me off as a man whose story had ended with a signature on a divorce paper. "You handled that beautifully," I told Aisha. She smiled. "Handled what?" "I just told the truth. That's the part they're not used to," I said. Unapologetic truth. She leaned into me slightly. "You don't have to perform anymore, Marcus. Not for them. Not for anyone." That landed hard, and it stayed with me the rest of the night. We made our rounds again, and this time, no one ignored us. Everyone wanted a moment, an introduction, a comment, a question about our latest ventures. Suddenly, I wasn't a question mark in Camille's story. I was a period at the end of a sentence she never saw coming. And Aisha? She wasn't an accessory. She was a revelation. Later, as we stepped outside and the cooler air kissed our skin, I looked up at the sky, the stars barely visible over the city haze. I thought about who I'd been just 2 years ago, standing in a small apartment, signing divorce papers, wondering if I'd wasted the best years of my life on someone who saw me as less. But tonight, I didn't feel small. I felt rewritten. The days that followed the gala were quieter, but not in the way silence used to feel. Not like isolation. Not like failure. This was a charged stillness, the kind you hear before something shifts permanently. It was the silence of attention recalibrated, of narratives rewritten behind closed doors and conference calls. Camille didn't reach out. Not directly, but I felt her presence in the tremors. You could see it in the industry newsletters, in the sudden warmth of people who once looked through me like glass. The first sign came through an old contact, someone from the investor circle I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Sterling asked about you," he said casually, as if it were a compliment. "Wants to know if you'd be open to exploring a collaboration. Something real estate adjacent, tech enhanced." I didn't even hesitate. "Tell him no." The contact chuckled. That's it. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. Sterling had never seen me until Aisha walked in and made sure everyone else did. And now that he couldn't ignore me, he wanted access. But my time wasn't a door you could knock on after you'd mocked the architecture. Then came the letter. Langford Foundation stationery, of course, thick and creamy, the kind of paper that screamed legacy. A typed thank you from their executive board, signed at the bottom in Sterling's hurried scrawl. "Thank you for your generous donation and your presence at the gala. Your support helps advance our mission and shape our community impact." I read it once, then twice. Nowhere in the letter did Camille's name appear, and that absence was the loudest part of all. Aisha sat across from me at the kitchen island of our Malibu rental, scrolling through press coverage of the gala. "You're in 3 different recap blogs," she said, amused. "Most of them refer to you as the mystery man, who arrived solo and left with the woman who stole the evening. I smirked. That's better than Camille's ex-husband. She glanced up at me. That label's dead. You buried it. I exhaled, long and quiet. She was right. This was no longer about clearing my name from the smudge Camille had painted it into. This was about expanding past the frame entirely. And that meant moving with intention. So we did. We had been planning a scholarship fund for months, something Aisha dreamed up during one of our retreats in Marrakesh. Pan-African, future-focused, she said. For tech innovators with ideas and no access. It was supposed to launch later this year. But the gala gave us the perfect window. Instead of replying directly to the Langford Foundation, Aisha had her PR team draft a response. It thanked them for the opportunity, highlighted our shared commitment to innovation, and proposed a co-sponsored fund with a broader reach, international fellows from underrepresented nations, access to mentorship, and potential seed funding for graduates of the program. We didn't wait for their answer. We launched it ourselves. The announcement hit a week later, complete with press kits, a website rollout, and interviews lined up across 3 continents. And when Forbes Africa called us, the couple redrawing the blueprint of modern philanthropy, Aisha just smiled and said, "We're not redrawing it. We're throwing out the blueprint entirely." Every step we took from then on was deliberate. We started saying no more often. No to partnerships that looked good on paper but felt empty in execution. No to people who once saw us as backups and now wanted in on the momentum. No to shrinking so someone else could stand taller. Camille didn't speak to me, but she didn't need to. I saw her discomfort in the background of every industry event that followed. Her once breezy confidence was tight around the edges now, her eyes scanning for signs of whether she was still the center of every conversation. She wasn't, and that wasn't my doing. It was hers. I hadn't humiliated her. I hadn't gone public with any story. I didn't need to. Her arrogance had done the loudest work for me. All I did was exist, unapologetically, successfully, and in love with a woman who didn't just believe in me, but built with me. This wasn't a comeback. Comebacks suggest you're returning to something you lost. I hadn't come back. I'd gone forward. We spent that month splitting time between California and Dubai, finalizing plans for the scholarship, expanding Aisha's advisory roles, launching a private beta for my firm's new AI tool in sustainable urban planning. We were busy, yes, but it wasn't chaos, it was movement with meaning. One night, as we walked along the shoreline near our villa, barefoot in the sand, Aisha looked over at me and said, "You know what I admire most about you?" I shook my head. "What?" "You let people underestimate you, and then you never stay where they put you." I looked at her, the tide whispering at our ankles, and felt a quiet pride bloom in my chest. Not the loud kind that needs a stage. The kind that sits in your bones and tells you you're finally exactly where you were always meant to be. No spotlights. No applause. Just a life no one could laugh away. Dubai always had this unapologetic way of announcing itself. The skyline didn't blend, it cut. Steel and ambition stacked into silhouettes that looked like the future. Every time I returned, it reminded me of the silence I'd once chosen. The grind. The self-imposed exile. The place I disappeared into when the world expected me to crumble. But this time, I wasn't arriving alone. Aisha and I were back for our annual client retreat, an idea she birthed the first year we got married, back when everything was still raw and rebuilding. She said, if we want people to understand the kind of empire we're building, we have to let them walk through it. So we did. And now, every spring, we flew in our investors, our partners, a few selected journalists, and people we believed in. Not just for strategy sessions, but for something more immersive. Connection, vision, real alignment. This year, we took over a row of private beachfront villas on Palm Jumeirah. Each guest arrived to personalized welcome kits, their schedules tailored down to the minute. Thought leadership panels in the morning. Curated experiences in the afternoon. Candlelit dinners under the stars. We didn't call it a conference, we called it a glimpse. And this year, for the first time, I did something I hadn't before. I sent Camille an invitation. Not out of pettiness. Not to spark drama. But because I'd reached the point in my life where closure wasn't something I needed from her anymore. I just wanted her to see it, the world I'd built. The one she'd once said I wasn't capable of. I expected her to decline. Politely, maybe. Or not at all. But she came. She arrived alone. No Sterling. No entourage. Just Camille, dressed in a flowing black dress that looked expensive and vaguely defensive. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression unreadable. I watched her step out of the black car at the villa gates, take in the view, the people, the energy. She looked like someone who'd just walked into a foreign country where everyone spoke a language she didn't know. I didn't greet her. She wasn't a guest of honor. She was just a witness. Throughout the day, she observed everything. The round tables where global CEOs dissected AI ethics and sustainable ventures. The panels where Aisha moderated with ease and fire, translating between French, English, and Wolof as if they were flavors in a single sentence. The product demos. The waterfront brainstorming sessions. The elegance without pretense. The control without arrogance. I caught her watching Aisha often, especially during one fireside talk where Aisha outlined our scholarship initiative's second phase, expansion into 4 new African nations and a digital accelerator program for female founders. Camille didn't speak, but her eyes said enough. She was trying to reconcile the man she left with the man who sat beside this woman and looked like he belonged. That evening, as the sun dropped below the horizon and the villas glowed like lanterns against the sea, Camille found me standing on the balcony of the main suite. I heard her before I saw her, the soft shift of fabric, the subtle click of heels across smooth stone. "You've done well," she said quietly. I didn't look at her. I just watched the waves. "This isn't what I expected when I saw your name on the invite," she added. I thought it was a mistake. I finally turned. She looked different. Tired, maybe. Or just exposed, in a way she wasn't used to. "I didn't send it as a stunt," I said. "I know." She hesitated, then laughed softly. Though it would have been a good one. We stood in silence for a few moments. Below us, guests laughed over dinner. Glasses clinked. A string quartet played something slow and cinematic. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like freedom. "I misjudged you," she said finally. "No drama. No theatrics. Just that." I nodded. "Yes, you did." She swallowed. I thought I needed someone bigger. Louder. More immediate. "And you found him." A pause. "Yeah." We both knew that was a complicated answer. She looked around again. "Does she know?" she asked. "Aisha. About everything." I met her eyes. She knows enough. And what she doesn't know doesn't hurt her, because I've made peace with it. Camille nodded slowly, then whispered, "I wasn't kind to you." "No," I said. "But you were honest. Brutal, maybe. But honest." She nodded, eyes on the horizon now. "Still, I didn't expect you to build all this." "I didn't build it to spite you," I said. "I built it because I didn't want to be small anymore. Not in your eyes. Not in anyone's." She smiled faintly. "Well, you're definitely not small now." I said nothing. Eventually, she turned and walked back down the stairs, disappearing into the golden light of the terrace. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. That moment was the goodbye. And as I stood there, Aisha joined me, slipping her hand into mine. She didn't ask what Camille said. She just looked out over the sea and said, "Ready for the next chapter?" I nodded. Because whatever came next, I wasn't carrying the past with me anymore. The wine was chilled just right, poured into 2 stemmed glasses that caught the light from the penthouse balcony like they were part of the skyline. Aisha handed me mine without ceremony, her bare feet silent against the marble as she leaned on the glass railing beside me. Behind her, the Dubai skyline shimmered, all chrome and ambition under a velvet sky. Beside her, I felt like the man I had always wanted to be: quiet, sure, steady, whole. She took a sip, then exhaled through her nose like she was letting go of more than just breath. "You didn't need to prove anything," she said gently. I turned toward her, one elbow resting on the railing, the other hand warming my glass. "I know," I said, but part of me wanted them to see it. She didn't scold me, didn't correct the impulse. She just nodded once. Then they did. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the truth we didn't have to decorate with words anymore. I watched her for a moment, silhouetted against the night, her expression soft but certain. There was no ego in her voice. No performance. Just understanding. That's what made her different from anyone I'd ever known before. Aisha didn't need my success to prove her right. She needed my peace to know I was finally free. We stood there for a while, just watching. The city stretched below us like a living canvas. Boats glided through the marina like shadows. The hum of possibility rose from every window. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who thought love was about approval, about staying small enough to fit into someone else's mold. Camille had never asked me to dream bigger. She had asked me to change into someone else, someone shinier, louder, more immediately impressive. When I didn't, she left. And maybe I had resented her for that once. Maybe I had carried that resentment like a stone in my chest for far too long. But now? Now it felt like something I'd let fall behind me without even noticing. The real revenge wasn't the applause or the money or the press headlines. It wasn't Camille's regret or Sterling's confusion. It was the quiet, the clarity, the fact that I had healed into someone who didn't need to win the old argument anymore. I looked over at Aisha. Do you think she meant it? I asked. What she said, that she misjudged me. I think it doesn't matter, she said. Because she's not the one who has to live with the judgment anymore. You are. And I think you finally forgave yourself. That hit me harder than I expected. She was right. It wasn't Camille's voice in my head all those years. It was mine. I was the one who believed I wasn't enough. I was the one who let her opinion carry weight long after she walked out. I had built my empire not just from ambition, but from self-doubt. And now, for the first time, that part of me was quiet. I used to think success was the goal, I said. But now I think it's peace. Aisha smiled. Peace is the luxury most people never afford. I laughed. We should put that on a billboard. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her curls brushing my jawline. We'll start with the scholarship, she said. The rest will come. And it would. We had already mapped out the next expansion phase. Already had teams mobilizing across West Africa, South Asia, and parts of Latin America. We weren't building empires. We were building launch pads. Spaces for people who had fire but no fuel. People like I once was. I took another sip of wine, then set the glass down on the table behind us. The night air smelled of sea salt and jasmine. My phone buzzed in my pocket, an email from one of the publications that had covered the retreat. I didn't open it. I didn't need to see another headline, because I already knew what the real story was. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. Revenge was loud. Revenge burned fast. This was different. This was evolution. This was the kind of satisfaction that didn't need witnesses, though, ironically, it had gotten plenty. It was the kind that came when you stopped chasing the approval of the people who couldn't recognize your value until someone else put it in a spotlight. I turned to Aisha and pulled her closer. She smiled up at me, her hand resting lightly on my chest. What? She asked. I just love you, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Is that all? No, I said. But it's the part that matters the most. And it was. Because love, not the kind I had tried to earn, but the kind that shows up with both hands open, had changed everything. It had made the past small. It had made the pain quiet. It had made my name something I no longer flinched at hearing in the mouths of strangers. Now, when people said, Marcus, they said it with respect. And that was the kindest revenge of all.